Okay, in a recent video, Daniel Owen discussed if the CPUs are lagging behind GPU power or GPU power development. And at least in RTX 4090's case, its utilization is often below 90%, even with something like a 13900K. I guess it depends on the resolution and a few other things. What's your take on this? Any modern CPUs leaving GPU power on the table now or in the future, at least on high-end GPUs? Is the 4090 the exception that creates the rule? Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, CPU bottlenecking and that was a big talking point when the 4090 first came out. I think while I agree that GPU development seems to have been moving along quite well and CPUs have perhaps stagnated a little bit more, I'm not sure that's entirely the story. For example, games don't really utilize CPUs that well. Now, there could be a whole host of reasons why that is, or if it's even technically possible to use something like a 16 core 32 thread processor to its fullest, or to a high enough degree where it doesn't bottleneck a 4090 at 1080p. Seems like no is the answer, because gaming is still very heavily dependent on the primary thread. A 7950X in Hogwarts Legacy sees about 20% utilization in like Hogsmeade, for example, so one of the more demanding town areas of the game. Very low overall CPU utilization. Basically, the second CCD sees zero utilization. And then the game seems to use about 4 cores, around 60 to 70%. And then another 2-ish at about 40%, and the rest do about 20%. So overall, that's how you get to the 20% utilization. So the game isn't maxing out any one core there. We see that bit different behavior on Intel processors, so perhaps there's a sort of a cache or DRAM access latency penalty there that's reducing CPU utilization. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I think the issue there is that utilization is such a crude metric.
Oh.
It's kind of garbage. It's kind of a garbage metric. Like if we're talking about games utilizing all the CPU, most of the time when you look at that metric, it's how much of some aspect of multi-core performance is it using.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it really gives no insight into, is the cache being maxed out? Is the latency an issue? Or what specific aspect of the CPU is being utilized to the fullest? It gives really no indication of any of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, when it comes up to these questions, we're having a discussion about this beforehand, and it was pretty lengthy about various different angles to this. But I think my take on it is I think GPUs have been generally outpacing CPUs in terms of the performance benefits that we've been getting, especially for gaming. Gaming's, if you compare 4090 to what we were getting 5 years ago, the GPU performance has just gone massively through the roof. CPUs have been much more slow in that regard. They've certainly added a lot more cores to the mix, but that hasn't really translated into the same gains for gaming, mostly because games typically, as you said, single thread limited or require DRAM latency hasn't improved anywhere near in line with other aspects. Cache sizes have been similar for quite some time. Obviously we've got Vcache now, but yeah, I mean, I feel like that's one aspect of it. Obviously, I think the other aspect as well is that game engines at the moment do not particularly well utilize multi-threading aspects of processes. So potentially if games were able to be more multi-threaded, then you would see bottlenecks alleviated. But then again, not many games are able to do that. So there's questions over, we can sit here and say, it would be really nice if games were more multi-threaded and used 8 cores or 16 cores or whatever. But if the majority of game developers, especially for open world titles where there seems to be most often the issue, if they're not able to do that, then maybe there are other issues at play. It's not as simple as multi-thread your games. It's actually very technically difficult. I mean, it must be if they haven't done it to this point. So maybe future game engines like Unreal Engine 5 will change that, or game engines that are more designed for modern components, because a lot of games are built on ancient, by today's standard, engines that have been patched and patched and patched and patched and patched over many, many years. So they're built, I'm sure there's games today that are still built on engines largely designed for dual core or even single core processors, because game engines last for a long time. So there's many things at play here, but certainly, yeah, it feels like GPUs have outpaced CPUs in my opinion.
Yeah, potentially. Again, single thread performance has improved out of sight over the last 10 years. And then overall CPU performance has improved massively. So I'm sort of more on the software limitation side of things, I think game engines have a long way to go. But yeah, as you say, you can argue back and forth, and I don't think any one thing's wrong. I think it is a combination of things for sure. I think to just say, CPUs have stagnated and GPUs have outpaced them. I think while that could be part of it, I don't think that's the only thing. And what I do think is when we get, it'll be interesting to look back at this discussion in 5 years or whatever, when Unreal 5 games are prevalent, they're everywhere, and we've got games that utilize the engine really well. Going back and testing the hardware we have today and seeing how that could be interesting.
I still would have to wonder what even overall CPU performance looks like compared to overall GPU performance over the years. But I think as well, we don't need software tweaks to utilize the additional GPU hardware that's been provided. Games do scale generally pretty well to GPU hardware. So on some fronts, I guess from that perspective, GPU hardware improvements have been more effective is maybe the best way of putting it, as opposed to, outpacing or whatever. Yes, we've got more cores and things like that, but certainly CPU upgrades have been less effective for games than GPU upgrades have been.
Sure.
Very few optimizations are required for, obviously they need drivers and things like that. But on the game developer side of things, games from a long time ago do tend to run still faster on modern hardware. So again, it's a very complicated topic. You can't really point at one thing and be like, it's your fault. There's many different aspects.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and you test older games, especially games that a lot of people call very CPU demanding, which absolutely aren't, like Cities Skylines and StarCraft 2 and all those games that are so heavily primary thread bound. Like, that was the way of gaming for so long. And we're not that removed from that situation.
Yeah, but I wonder, is it accurate to say that those are not demanding on the CPU if it is demanding on one aspect of the CPU? Because I guess what you're talking about is it's not demanding from a multi-threading perspective.
Well, there's been
single-threading performance is also a valid part of performance.
But there have been examples of games like that are utilize one core. And then they eventually get patched where they utilize two cores and performance just improves out of sight.
Yeah, I mean, that is a software limitation. But again, it's again, on the GPU side, they can improve hardware and have very little tweaks to software and get big gains. Whereas on the CPU side, if the solution to more CPU performance requires drastic game engine changes because now more cores is the way forward, then yeah, I mean, that's clearly has been less effective than significantly improving IPC of those parts, which obviously isn't possible. Otherwise, they would have done that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I sit on this.
Yeah, I don't think it's any one thing really, and I'm not. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see how things go moving forward, and maybe this is something we can come back and revisit and see if we can give any further insight with actual testing in years to come from now. We'll see.
We need more game engines.
Yep.